First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's meeting. And a few months ago, John sent out invitations to members and friends for nominations for the most influential person in software development. And of course, over the years, there have been so many great people who've contributed to this area. But I'm very pleased to say that the top 3 nominations that we're going to consider today, 2 out of 3 of them are women. We all know that women are very good at software development, but we see few in our industry, and it's something that the institution wants to try to redress and get a more balanced area for our members. Looking at the nominations, the first we have is Ada Lovelace, who's a particular favourite of mine. I think she was extremely gifted, had a great mind in mathematics and logic, and even languages, and was, I suppose, she had 2 great parents, gifted parents. So I think it was almost inevitable that she was gifted in some way. The second one is Alan Turing, and it was a few years ago that I read a book which was the Annotated Turing. It was written, I've forgotten who the author was now, but what he did, he took the seminal 1936 paper of Alan Turing's and then dissected it bit by bit. And I realized by reading this how such a fantastic mind this man had. One of the things that I remember reading, which I couldn't believe for somebody who didn't have a computer as such, was how he sort of laid out the parsing of parameters. And one of the things was he would parse routines as parameters, which, I mean, that sort of technology took a long time in reality to get right. So the third nomination we have is Grace Hopper, who was involved with early work on compiler development, and of course the COBOL language. So without further ado from me, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Irene Jones, who's going to put the case for Ada Lovelace. Irene.
Thank you. Just let me get this PowerPoint going. Let's take it full screen. Okay, so actually, apart from this slide, I've only got 2 slides. The first one is really about her life, who she was and what she did. I ought to have it on, yeah, and I have it on slideshow. What am I doing? Oh yeah, and the other slide is like about her legacy. Gosh, what's it doing? Oh, I don't know. I'd forgotten about it. Is it okay like it is? Can you see it like that? Is that okay? Hello?
I can't see anything, Irene. Are you presenting?
Oh, I've got to do. No, I've got. Sorry, I've got to share the screen. I do apologise. I am not used to this. Not in this way. Is that better? Is that
yes?
Okay.
Yeah, you can see that now.
Yeah. Okay. So, Ada was born Augusta Ada Byron in 1815. So she was the daughter of Lord and Lady Byron, and Byron, of course, was a famous poet. And strangely enough, she spent her early years at her mother's family home in Kirby Hall in Kirby Mallory in Leicestershire, which is only a few miles from where I live, because basically her father split up and left her mother not long after she was born. So her mother went back to the family home. And her mother insisted that she had a really good education. She organised private education to a very high level in all kinds of subjects, which Paul has mentioned. Languages is one of them, mathematics and science particularly, which is very, very unusual. Remember, this is the early 1800s, and girls probably didn't get an education on the whole, let alone an education in things like maths and science. So she was very lucky, really, that her mother insisted on that. Now, in 1834, she visited the industrial north of England, and there she saw this jacquard loom. And the interesting thing, I think, about that is it used punched cards to direct the pattern weaving. Very interesting at that time of the thing. So after that, she met Charles Babbage at a party. So that's where it all started, that eventually led to her working with Charles Babbage later on. Now, I don't know if you, like me, have ever wondered how come she's got the name Lovelace? She was born a Byron, so, you know, and her mother's name wasn't Lovelace, so how come she got this name of Lovelace? And it was because she married William Kingnall, who was the first Earl of Lovelace, and that's where her name comes from. In 1843, she published a translation from the French of an article on Babbage's analytical engine, and that was the article in French was actually by an Italian engineer, but she added, you know, a lot of notes of her own. And the notes included the first published description of a stepwise sequence of operation for solving certain mathematical problems. She went on to write code to calculate Bernoulli numbers, and you might be pleased to know that I'm not going to even try to explain what they are today. But sadly, when she was only 36, she died of uterine cancer, which of course there was nothing really they could do for her once that was found. So we're going to move on now to what I think is her legacy. First of all, the Ada programming language, which was named after her in the 1980s. Secondly, the Ada Lovelace Institute, also named after her. Now, this is an independent research institute and deliberative body, and its mission is to ensure that data and AI work for people and society. Thirdly, we've got the Ada Lovelace Day. I think that's an annual thing, the Ada Lovelace Day. This is to celebrate and promote the achievements of all women in STEM fields. And I think she was, and she is still, I think, an inspiration for women and men to pursue careers in computing. Because, as Paul previously mentioned, this is a field which is so underrepresented by women. So it's really good that today some people are still, you know, using her name with her can-do attitude, you know, to try something new is having an effect still today. Now, the next thing on the slide there is a quote, an exact quote, which I'll read out as it is. The analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. So she foresaw that you could use computers, you know, for much more than just doing, you know, mathematical calculations. So really, more than a century before anything came into being, she foresaw the full potential of computers. Now, the statement there, that quote, if you like, it had an influence on Alan Turing's work, because he studied her work and he refuted her statement, because he was doing work in the 1950s on thinking machines, and he didn't agree with what she'd said. So that's quite a contentious and important point. Beyond that, we have the Lovelace test, which was developed in the early 2000s. And to pass this test, a computer has to create something original all by itself. And this test is a rival for the Turing test. So arguably, yes, and it is an argument. Not everyone by any means is agreed about this. We argue about whether she really was the first computer programmer. She certainly was a pioneer of computing, as the blue plaque there on the right of the slide tells you. That blue plaque there is in St James's Square in London, where she later lived. So I think it's very widely agreed that she was a pioneer of computing, even if not everybody agrees about whether she was the first programmer. I think one of the problems was that the program that she wrote for the analytical engine was never actually run, because the analytical engine never got built. So that was rather unfortunate. But they do say that she thought very carefully about how operations could be organized into groups that could be repeated, thereby inventing the loop. And she realized how important it was to track the state of variables as they changed, and she introduced a notation to illustrate those changes. So finally, hot off the press, I read yesterday, as further evidence of Ada's lasting legacy, that Loughborough University, also in Leicestershire, have unveiled a new supercomputer, and they've called it Ada Lovelace. I rest my case.
That's fantastic. That's really good news
Thank
and well deserved. Thank you for your presentation, Irene. That was extremely good.
Well, I don't do it on a regular basis. So thank you very much.
Can I just remind everybody, if you're not speaking, could you mute your mics, please? Okay, next up, we have Paul Hazelden, who's going to give us a presentation on Alan Turing. Over to you, Paul.
Hello there.
Hi.
Hi, I'm hopefully sharing my window. I'm trying to do it anyway. Share. Aha, gotcha. Can you see it?
Yes.
Excellent. Right, Alan Turing. Yes, I assume everybody knows what he looks like. I think that's the picture that the Bank of England is using for the new £50 note. So, Alan Turing, utter genius. Probably nobody else will be interested in this detail, but in 27, he moved with his parents to Ennismore Avenue in Guildford. I happened to live just around the corner from that for a while, but I never knew there was that connection. Probably more importantly, in October 31, he became a fellow of King's College, Cambridge, at the ripe old age of 22. But in November and December 36, he published what is probably the most important math paper in history, on computable numbers. And in that, he describes what we now know as the universal Turing machine, and that is the model on which all modern computers are based. So it's there are no more significant papers, as far as I know, in science as far as computers are concerned. Anyway, yes, the important paper when he was at Princeton on dealing with the limits of what computers are capable of. Famous time in Bletchley Park. We don't need to say much more about that, I would assume. Lovely quote from a chap called Jack Good. I won't say that what Turing did made us win the war, but I dare say we might have lost it without him. Yes, lots more could be said about his time at Bletchley Park. We don't have time. He moved on to National Physical Laboratory in London, where he designed and was involved in developing the automatic computing engine, which several groups were doing this at the time, including the group up in Manchester. While the engineers were actually building the ACE, he and his group created a library of programs to run on it, which I think is an utterly astonishing achievement. 1946, he was appointed an Officer of the Order of British Empire. 47, a lecture on automatic computing engine, the first public lecture to mention computer intelligence. In 1948, he did a report, Intelligent Machinery, which effectively created the whole field of artificial intelligence. He published a paper in Mind in October 1950, where he describes what we now know as the Turing test, which everybody knows about. Elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1951. And then he lots and lots of different areas of interest. And one of them, chemical basis for morphogenesis, how mathematical models can show through chemicals how spots and stripes and different forms in living organisms can be produced. Absolutely groundbreaking work at the time. And I'm sure everybody's familiar in 1952, he was prosecuted for homosexual activity and given hormone therapy as a result. He was appointed a reader in the theory of computing at Manchester, who had succeeded in building the computer. He published an article on computer chess. Computers really are new at this point, but he's still exploring what they're capable of. Solvable and unsolvable problems in 54, developing ideas that originate from his uncomputable numbers right at the start. And then in 54, he dies, possibly accidentally, from cyanide poisoning. So Time magazine named him as one of the 100 most important people of the 20th century, with a lovely quote: "The fact remains everyone who taps at a keyboard, opening a spreadsheet or word processing program, is working on an incarnation of a Turing machine." And that is his legacy in every single machine we have today. Finally, in December 2013, he received a posthumous pardon for his conviction. The BBC voted him the greatest person of the 20th century, which I think is only fitting. And in March, the Bank of England released its design for the £50 note, and that will be issued on the anniversary of his birthday. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. That was, again, another interesting presentation. Finally, we have Grace Hopper as our third nomination, and our friend John Ellis will tell us all about Grace. Over to you, John.
Wonderful. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Wonderful. So yes, Grace Hopper. Picture there of her back in the day. So this is late 50s. Originally Grace Murray, but she had married obviously Mr. Hopper. Unfortunately for her, she divorced him in 1945. She's got a PhD in maths from Yale. She tried to join the US Navy at the beginning of the Second World War, but was refused because apparently she was too old at 34. So she joined the reserves and stayed there for many years. In 1944, she joined the Harvard Mark I team. 5 years later, she joined the UNIVAC team. And then in 1952, she wrote her first English terms compiler, something that would interpret words. In those days, they were called linkers, which reminds me back of my earlier days in programming. In 1959, she wrote the Flowmatic programming language, which, together with others that she worked with later, a year later, well, same year, became what we now know as COBOL, which from the late 70s through to the mid 90s kept me in gainful employment. So it really is her mainstay is COBOL. Developed in the 50s, and it was created. The group of people got together, but basically all based around her ideas on English language instructions for a computer. And so the common business orientated language, which we all came to know, and that was done with her Flowmatic, UNIVAC's Amico, and IBM's Comtran groups. But basically it was her brainchild. I found this quite astounding. So it may be a year out of date, but Reuters, they think there's at least 220 billion lines of code still out there. I apologize for any of the people that have still got some of mine. And it's still in use. 43% of banking systems, even the ATM machines, use COBOL. Maybe it's just more secure than some of the more modern languages. And I did a lot of work in the 90s for insurance companies, and all their backends are still written in COBOL. Many of them are still running what now we use online. The backend quote engines are still in COBOL. As a language, it's been with us since the 60s, and it's going to be with us for a lot longer. Several reasons. Prime one being is that to replace COBOL code with something else is extortionately expensive. The Australians, even nearly 10 years ago, it was going to cost them $750 million just to change it in one organization. And bizarrely, COBOL is still being developed as a programming language. You can get it for PCs. There is Visual COBOL. There's COBOL.net, which will interface obviously with Microsoft products. And so keeping upgrading it in the latest version of the language is just a lot cheaper. And I think in America currently there are 75 schools that still teach COBOL as a programming language. So back to more of Grace. In 1966, she retired from the Navy Reserve, having got the rank of commander. And within a few months, she was recalled back to the Navy because they were having such problems with the amount of different languages, programs that they were using. So they asked her to sort it out for them. And she retired from the Navy when she was 79 as a Rear Admiral. And as it says there, she's the oldest serving officer in the US Armed Forces. You've got to go some for that. She carried on working at DEC for a few years until 1992 when she died, and she's buried in Arlington Cemetery. This is just some of her legacy. Obviously, she was made a Rear Admiral. She had 40 honorary degrees. There are loads of institutions and other bursaries, etc., that are named after her. The Wilbur Lucius Cross Medal awarded to her. First American to become a Distinguished Fellow of the British Computer Society. So that's quite a statement. In 1991, President Bush awarded her the National Medal of Technology. In '96, the Navy named a ship after her, a guided military destroyer. And I think that's still out there at the moment. In 2016, Barack Obama gave her the Presidential of Medal of Freedom. Unfortunately, she'd already died then, but still a great award to be given. Well, she opened up programming to the business world. COBOL programming was used across the world, from local government to food retail industries, to banking, to I'm trying to get any business process, invoicing, etc. The systems of the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s easily were written in COBOL. Obviously, as PCs came along, different languages appeared, but even there, COBOL carried on. Personally, I see at least another 20 years of developing in COBOL, possibly a lot longer. Her achievements have inspired men and women all over the world and still do so. And final thought is, if you come across any of my code, some of it's good, some of it's bad, but I'm sure it'll keep you employed. And thank you very much. There you go.
Thank you, John. I remember I was working for a company in Bristol in the early 2000s and read a report on the reflections of the year 2000 problem. And even at that time, they estimated that 50% of all code that had been written in COBOL. So I think Grace Hopper's had a massive effect on software development. Okay, and now to the winner. And as they say in all these good competitions where there has to be a winner, the winner is Alan Turing. I would like to thank everyone for your participation today. It's been very interesting presentation. Learn a lot about people who've had a massive impact on software development. The IAP's goal is to improve software for society. And in fact, we have a role in the Trustworthy Software Foundation, which I think is becoming more important than ever, especially with recent events with the post office scandal and the diesel car emissions. So all you people out there who write software, please bear that in mind. If there's anything you can do for the institution in any way, we'd be most thankful. We are trying to get together a series of webinars on different topics. So if there is anything you think you can contribute or would like to do a presentation or anything else, in fact, please get in touch with us. Thank you once again for your attendance. Have a good day.
Thank you for hosting it, Paul.